Well, for more on this, let's go to Moscow Times journalist Jake Cordell on this. Jake, a very good morning to you. Jake, has there been a response from Washington on what's going on, and what are you getting on the ground, the feeling as to how tensions are rising or moving?
Well, we saw from those pictures that tensions really are quite high. You can see the sheer firepower that Russia has amassed around Ukraine, really from three sides. It's got really significant military forces. And this has been the case for a few months now. And there's a feeling that we must be getting close to something. Something has got to give soon. We can't go on with this standoff forever. Now, the US has said there is no way it's going to give in to Russia's demands. Russia is demanding that NATO and the US issue a legal guarantee that Ukraine never joins NATO. The US for months has said that's a non-starter, that Ukraine gets to pick who it's allied with. Vladimir Putin yesterday made his first public comment on this standoff in a month, another sign that this may be heading towards some kind of resolution or next step. He pushed back against the US, said the US is completely rejecting Russia's legitimate demands in his eyes. So we're really, on the diplomatic front, we haven't really moved anywhere in 2 months. And meanwhile, we see this very, very high-profile troop buildup in and around Ukraine. And it's getting very, very nervous for politicians in Kiev and also in Europe and Washington.
Yeah, I know you say we haven't moved anywhere in 2 months, but there is a slight change, isn't there, in that President Macron is becoming more prominent in talks. Vladimir Putin seems to think, yeah, I could do business with you. I'll talk to this guy. We'll not bother talking to America or Britain. And the EU also being more accessible to him.
Yeah, the EU has pushed forward. It's trying to push forward its own, what it calls its kind of anomalous security approach. It wants to be a big player on this stage. And Macron has had phone calls with Vladimir Putin, and he's hosted summits with Ukrainian officials. And he's got some statements saying that neither side want war, which is all fine. The same with Boris Johnson's visit to Ukraine yesterday in a very public show of force for Ukraine. Europe has been very, very big in supporting Ukraine. And we saw yesterday a package, more than €1 billion of financial aid was passed to Ukraine. But the feeling here in Moscow, maybe the understanding here in Moscow, is there is only one world leader that really matters when it comes to this. Joe Biden on the other side, and then, of course, Vladimir Putin here. So for all the diplomacy going on in Europe, Moscow really sees itself as above the European Union. It sees itself as above Britain. It's a bigger world player, and it sees itself on a par with Washington, maybe China. And so there's only really one person that Putin is willing to talk to on this.
Just tell us how this is being covered in Moscow. I mean, you talk about the importance of Biden from the Russian perspective, and is he a laughingstock over in Russia, given, the sort of Sleepy Joe kind of look that he's portraying? And the same question regarding Boris Johnson. We saw Zelensky's team yesterday joking that they hadn't been confronted with a cake or ambushed with a cake. I mean, is that cutting through over in Russia, all this domestic strife for Boris Johnson?
Well, it certainly hasn't gone unnoticed here in Moscow that, of course, Boris Johnson had to cancel a planned phone call with Vladimir Putin because he was in Parliament responding to the Sue Gray report. That's certainly been noticed, and the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, his spokespeople were in no rush to rearrange that call. Even yesterday, when Boris Johnson's team was saying, yes, we've got it in the diary, he's going to speak to Putin as soon as possible, the music from Moscow was like, well, we'll wait and see. We haven't arranged anything yet. So there is an understanding here in Moscow that some domestic concerns are playing into this. The same with Emmanuel Macron, who's going to be running for re-election soon. So there is a feeling that there is a bit of playing to the domestic audience here in Moscow. In terms of the mood on the ground, it's a lot calmer here in Moscow than it is in other capitals. And the same in Kiev. I think we've seen the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky try to play down this fear because he doesn't want to scare his people. And in Moscow here, you have to remember these two countries have been at war already for 8 years. So there is a sense of, well, what's different this time around here in Moscow? And they're kind of going through the motions. Whether or not that turns out to be the case, of course, nobody really knows, perhaps except Vladimir Putin.
So, Jake, it is fascinating talking to you there, and you're talking about there on the ground. We talk about governmental level, and then you talk about there on the ground and the fact that these two countries have been at war for 8 years. So it's very much something, the tension is what they're used to. Let me ask you this. I mean, going out and about, going to the pubs or the restaurants or whatever, do people care? Do they care? You know, on the ground in Moscow, does the average Muscovite care about this?
Yeah, I think people do care. It would be wrong to confuse the fact that this maybe isn't a high tension or high risk of fear with the fact that people care. This is a topic which everyone is talking about. And you have to remember that the ties between Russia and Ukraine are very strong. Lots of families have relatives or at the very least friends who live in Ukraine, and vice versa for families living in Ukraine. So people will almost certainly have some kind of personal stake in this. However, there is this understanding that, well, not an understanding, perhaps there is this cynicism among people that this is a political game. They're firing words at each other, but very few bullets may follow those words, and that they've lived in an authoritarian system. They kind of understand that, as to some extent, they just have to go with the flow, and there's nothing they can really do, the people here in Moscow, to influence the situation and to influence what Vladimir Putin is doing. So there certainly is an awareness of this topic, and it's being talked about on the streets, it's being talked about in the TV studios as well. But there isn't a kind of fear or imminent or concern that war will be imminent here. Again, we don't know whether that's misplaced or whether it's a complacency that's built in over the past 8 years or what it is to do with, but certainly not as fraught as you might expect.
And just really quickly, Jake, so we're almost out of time, but is this also helping to boost the popularity of Putin, which some commentators have suggested was ailing following the pandemic, that sometimes something like this sort of show of strength really pleases the Russian people?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. His support has been flagging, but then again, Russia has been in this standoff with the West for so long that it's really hard to see whether this latest thing changes anything significantly. As I said, Russians have been dealing with this for many years. I'm not sure this really moves the dial in terms of Putin presenting himself as a ferocious leader that the world fears.
OK, Jake, really fascinating talking to you. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it. Come talk to us again. Thank you very much.